America tried to harm India, but ended up losing big. That's the truth that nobody wants to admit out loud, but it's written all over the face of history if you just pay attention. You see, for too long, people believed that the United States could pull the strings of the world like a puppet master. They thought they had the keys to global power. They thought they could decide which country rises and which country falls. And for decades they did exactly that. They interfered, they destabilized, they sanctioned, they intimidated, and most nations bent their knee, because when America said jump, the rest of the world asked how high. But then came India, a civilization thousands of years old, rooted in values, in culture, in strength, and in pride. India did not kneel, India did not bend, India did not crumble, and that is the part of the story that shocks the world. Because the more America tried to harm India, the more India found new ways to rise, and in the end, it is America that ended up losing big. Now think about it. When America looks at India, what do they see? They don't just see another developing country. They don't just see a nation of over 1 billion people. They see a potential rival, a nation that could one day take the very position America has held for so long as the undisputed leader of the world. And let's be clear, America doesn't like rivals. They didn't like Japan when it rose in the 80s. They didn't like China when it rose in the 2000s. And they don't like India rising now. The only difference is that, unlike others, India isn't playing by their rules, and that scares them more than anything else. At first, America tried the sweet talk. They said India was their partner, their ally, their strategic friend. They talked about shared values, about democracy, about cooperation. But behind closed doors, they always wanted India to remain dependent on American technology, dependent on American defense deals, dependent on American markets. Because a dependent India is a controlled India, and a controlled India is never a threat. But India wasn't playing that game. India was learning, building, innovating, and creating its own path. And the more America tried to box India in, the more India found ways to break out of that box. So when America saw that India wasn't going to play along, what did they do? They tried to harm India. They tried to isolate India diplomatically. They tried to interfere in its neighborhood. They tried to play the Pakistan card over and over again. They put India under pressure on issues like Kashmir, on defense policies, on trade tariffs. They thought if they pushed enough, India would cave. But here's the part they never understood. India doesn't cave under pressure. India thrives under pressure. For centuries, invaders, colonizers, empires all tried to crush India, and every single time India rose back stronger. That's not just politics, that's civilization. That's resilience built into the DNA of the people. Every sanction, every attempt to slow India down, backfired. When America tried to deny India certain technologies, India built its own. When America tried to dominate India's defense procurement, India turned to Russia, to France, to Israel, and most importantly, to its own scientists. That's how India created weapons that stunned the world, like the Agni missiles, like the Tejas jets, like the Akash systems. That's how India built its space program, not by begging for handouts, but by engineering with brilliance, discipline, and vision. And let me tell you, when India launched a mission to Mars cheaper than the cost of a Hollywood movie, the whole world, including America, realized that this was not the India of yesterday. This was a new India, and nothing could stop it. Economically, too, America tried to play games. They used trade wars, they pulled out of deals, they cut benefits that Indian exporters relied on. They thought that would cripple India's growth. But instead, India looked inward. India built manufacturing strength. India boosted its startups. India leaned on its youth population. And suddenly, the same country that America thought it could weaken became one of the fastest growing economies in the world. Tech giants, investment funds, global corporations, They all started lining up for India because you can't ignore a billion-strong consumer market powered by digital innovation. And America had to watch as its own companies begged for access to Indian markets, because without India, their growth charts were incomplete. Geopolitically, America tried to corner India. They used forums, alliances, pressure tactics. They thought they could dictate India's foreign policy, especially when it came to Russia and China. But India did something that shocked them. It said no. India said it would buy oil from Russia if it needed to. India said it would maintain relations on its own terms. India said it wasn't going to be told who to be friends with, because India makes decisions based on Indian interests, not American orders, and that simple act of strategic independence was a game changer. The world watched as America shouted and complained, but India stayed calm, composed and firm. That's the mark of a true rising power, not reacting with fear, but acting with clarity. The truth is, America underestimated India. They thought of India only as a service hub, a back office, a market. They never thought India could become a player, a maker, a leader. And now they're realizing that while they were busy trying to harm India, they were actually harming themselves. Because every time they tried to block India, India found another way, and those new ways ended up creating systems and networks that no longer relied on America. That means less leverage, less influence, less control for them. In trying to stop India, America ended up speeding up the very independence they feared. Let's talk about technology. America wanted India dependent on Silicon Valley, on American software, on American platforms. But when America tried to control the digital narrative, India responded with its own digital revolution. UPI payments transformed the way money moves in India, creating one of the most advanced payment systems in the world. Indian startups started building alternatives in e-commerce, in social media, in fintech. And now the same America that thought it had digital dominance is watching India become a model for the world. Nations in Africa, in Asia, in Latin America, they are studying India's digital stack, not America's. That's what losing big looks like. Even in defense, when America withheld systems, India innovated. When America pressured India to abandon Russian weapons, India diversified. And the result is that India today has one of the most balanced and self-reliant defense ecosystems. Indigenous drones, indigenous fighter jets, indigenous missiles. They're all real, they're all working, and they're all proving that you can't keep India down. The same country once mocked for poverty is now exporting weapons to other nations. That's a turnaround so massive that it makes the so-called global power nervous. And then there's the people. The Indian diaspora in America is among the most successful, the most influential communities in that country. CEO of major American companies are Indian. Nobel laureates are Indian. Innovators, doctors, engineers, entrepreneurs. Indians are at the very heart of American progress. That means every attempt to harm India comes back to hurt America itself, because America cannot function at its best without Indian talent. That's the irony. The very people they tried to keep down are the people lifting their own nation up. But let's not forget the psychological shift. For decades, America was the dream. For countries, for leaders, for individuals, the idea was to follow America, to please America, to align with America. But India has broken that psychological barrier. India has shown that you can disagree with America, you can push back against America, and you can still rise. That has inspired other nations too. Countries in Africa, in Asia, in Latin America, they are watching India and saying if India can stand tall, so can we. That means America's ability to control the narrative, to set the rules, to dictate terms, is slipping away. And it started with India refusing to bow. the more America tried to harm India, the more respect India gained worldwide. Look at the United Nations. Look at international summits. Look at trade negotiations. India is no longer the silent participant. India is the one setting the tone, asking the hard questions, and demanding fairness. And because India has the economic weight, the military strength, and the diplomatic confidence, the world is listening. America doesn't like that, but there's nothing they can do about it, because respect cannot be forced. It must be earned, and India has earned it. Here's the reality. America ended up losing big because they forgot the oldest rule of power. When you fight a nation that feeds off adversity, you only make it stronger, and India is exactly that kind of nation. It doesn't just survive challenges, it transforms them into fuel for growth. You put obstacles, India makes highways. You try to break them, they make breakthroughs. You try to isolate them, they create alliances. You try to humiliate them, they turn it into pride. That's why every attempt to harm India has backfired spectacularly. Now, America stands at a crossroads. They can continue trying to play games with India, or they can accept the reality that India is here to stay as a major global power. The choice is theirs, but the outcome is already written, because India's rise is not dependent on America's approval. India's rise is powered by its people, its innovation, its resilience, its civilization. And no empire, no superpower, no external force can stop that. So let the world hear this clearly. America tried to harm India, but ended up losing big. And they will keep losing if they don't learn the lesson. The lesson that you cannot suppress a billion dreams. The lesson that you cannot silence a civilization. The lesson that when you push India down, India rises higher. And the higher India rises, the more the old powers are exposed for what they really are, afraid of change, afraid of competition, afraid of the future. But the future doesn't wait for anyone. The future belongs to those who dare to shape it. And right now, India is shaping it with courage, with clarity, with conviction. The world sees it, the people feel it, and history will record it. America tried to harm India, but instead they unlocked a new era. An era where India stands as a global power, not by permission, not by favor, but by right. And that is the truth no one can deny. It marked the birth of India's assertive military doctrine backed by innovation. By trying to keep India in check, America accelerated the very rise it feared most. That is the paradox of power, that is the irony of history, and that is exactly what unfolded in front of the world when the old superpower believed it could dictate the terms of India's destiny. When America tried to box India in, it did not create submission, it created resistance, and that resistance became transformation. Every attempt to hold India back became an excuse for India to leap forward. Every restriction became motivation, every denial became a spark for innovation. And out of those sparks, India began to build something greater than anyone had expected. A doctrine that was not only military, but psychological, strategic, and civilizational in scope. Think about the way it started. America had long believed that India's military strength would always remain dependent on outside supply chains, foreign blueprints, and imported systems. They wanted India to be a buyer, not a builder, a recipient, not a creator. By holding back critical technologies, by imposing conditions on defense deals, by pressuring India to abandon long-term partners, they believed they could keep India limited in capability. But what they never accounted for was the willpower of Indian scientists, engineers, and defense planners. When they slammed the door on technology, India built its own labs. When they restricted systems, India designed its own models. When they said India couldn't do it, India simply did it. This is where the assertive military doctrine began to take shape. For decades, India's defense policy was cautious, largely reactive, shaped by the scars of partition, wars, and constant cross-border threats. But as America tried to push India into dependence, India realized the only way forward was through self-reliance. That realization did not come softly. It came through fire, through pressure, through repeated attempts to weaken India's hand, and instead of weakening, it hardened India's resolve. The doctrine shifted from simply defending territory to projecting deterrence, from waiting for threats to preparing to neutralize them before they could grow, from being reactive to being proactive. This was not the doctrine of a hesitant nation. This was the doctrine of a rising power that understood the game and decided to play it on its own terms. One of the clearest signs of this shift was India's missile program. America had once tried to deny India the building blocks for long-range precision weaponry. They thought that by controlling access to such technology, they could slow India down. Instead, India created the Agni series, weapons capable of striking across continents, weapons that announced to the world that India was not going to be intimidated. The very restrictions that were meant to stop India had actually forced India to innovate beyond expectations. And once India showed it could build those systems independently, the entire calculus of regional security changed. Enemies thought twice before provoking, and allies looked at India with new respect. That's how doctrine transforms, not through permission, but through necessity, and America itself had created that necessity, the same story repeated in air power. When America delayed or denied advanced systems, India doubled down on indigenous projects like the Tejas fighter jet program. It wasn't easy, it wasn't smooth, and critics mocked it. But persistence is what separates the ordinary from the extraordinary. India did not quit, and today the Tejas stands as proof that when forced to rely on its own genius, India can deliver. That delivery became more than an aircraft. It became a symbol of sovereignty. It told the world that India's skies would not be defended on borrowed wings, but on its own creations. And again, the irony is clear. America's attempts to keep India reliant were what gave India the fire to build independence. Cyber and space defense followed the same path. America wanted dominance in these realms, assuming others would remain followers. But the moment they tried to restrict India's access, India turned inward and built its own. India's space program not only reached Mars, but also laid the foundation for military space capabilities. And satellite tests showed that India could hold its own even in the most advanced domains. In cyberspace, India's doctrine evolved into protecting its digital sovereignty, building firewalls not just of technology but of mindset, ensuring no external actor could dictate the flow of its data. The doctrine of an assertive India was no longer confined to land borders. It extended to the skies, the seas, outer space, and cyberspace, making it multidimensional, modern, and impossible to ignore. But doctrine is not only about machines, it is about mindset. America miscalculated the Indian mindset. They believed pressure would break it, that dependency would make it submissive. Instead, pressure hardened it, dependency was rejected, and submission turned into resistance. India's military leadership began to embrace a philosophy rooted not only in Western models, but in its own civilizational ethos, flexibility, patience, and resilience. Where America wanted India to simply play the role of junior partner, India decided to step into the role of an independent pole in the global order. That independence translated into military postures, doctrines, and exercises that no longer required external approval. It was a declaration without words. India would defend itself on its own terms with its own strength. Guided by its own strategy, this assertiveness began to echo in the region. Neighbors who once dismissed India's ability to project power began to rethink their assumptions. The balance shifted. America's constant attempts to counterbalance India with Pakistan backfired spectacularly. Because the more America tried to arm and support Pakistan, the more India realized it had to widen the gap. That widening came through innovation, not through dependency. As Pakistan sank deeper into crisis, India's military doctrine rose higher into strength. The very strategy America believed would keep India checked ended up isolating America itself, because other nations saw that India's rise was unstoppable and began adjusting their policies accordingly, and it wasn't just about Pakistan. America wanted India limited in the Indo-Pacific too, thinking they could dictate the terms of maritime power. But India, with its doctrine of strategic autonomy, began building naval capabilities that extended far beyond coastal defense. Indigenous aircraft carriers, nuclear submarines, advanced destroyers. All of this was fueled by the idea that no one would secure India's seas except India itself. And here again, America's attempts to limit access to critical maritime technology forced India to innovate. The doctrine evolved into one of power projection, not just defense, and it was America's attempt to restrict India that lit that fire. What America never understood is that India's rise is not just geopolitical, it is civilizational. You cannot keep down a civilization that has survived thousands of years of invasions, occupations, and exploitation. Every time an outsider has tried to suppress India, India has come back stronger. That resilience became institutionalized into military doctrine. America, in trying to harm India, simply triggered another cycle of resilience. The more they tried to keep India from reaching its potential, the faster India unlocked that potential. The doctrine that emerged was not born of comfort but of challenge, and doctrines born of challenge are the strongest doctrines of all now. When the world looks at India's military, it does not see a country waiting for approval, it sees a country ready to act. Exercises are larger, joint operations are sharper, and doctrines are clearer. The message is simple: India will not be dictated to, India will not be controlled, and India will not be checked. And all of this evolution, came because America tried to do exactly that. The rise that America feared most was not slowed, it was accelerated. The doctrine that America wanted to prevent was the doctrine they themselves inspired. The power they wanted to limit is the power they themselves amplified. And that is why history is full of irony, because in trying to keep India small, America made India great.